Good afternoon, Muskegon. How you doing? It's time for touring into this 18th of November. Man, can you believe 18th of November? Next week will be Thanksgiving. Uh, Stay tuned. If the staff have the day off, we will take the day off because I don't want anyone to come in to do the show, but because we like to do the show live, so stay tuned for that. Weather, I just want you to know the weather forecast for the next 20 days is going to be like in this same holding pattern, what you see right now. It will get up to the 40s around, let's see, November 27th, sorry. All right. Let me get my partner in crime. Put your hands together for one of the twins, Pastor Melvin C. Burns. How you doing, sir?
Hey, I'm good, brother. It's good to see you back in your seat.
Yeah, great show last week, man. Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Um, Today we have, he is no stranger to the show. Um, Before I do that, let me tell people this. If you are listening to the show and like to watch the show, you can do this by via 103.7 the BUVS or M106 Facebook site. You can like our YouTube page, WVS 103.7 The Beat, as well if you would like to watch it and ask questions because the guy that I have on, he is such a hot commodity. It took us 2 years to get him back on. Um, we feel honored and blessed to get him on. He does have a show. He flies in on his helicopter, and we get him in. Put your hands together for Muskegon County Prosecutor DJ Hilson. How you doing, sir?
Well, listen, I look forward to finding that helicopter you guys keep talking about. It sounds like a really cool deal. Um,
We haven't seen you for quite a while. 9/25/20.
I guess I didn't even realize it's been that long, and it's unfortunate. But it's not torn in two with DJ Hilson, so I don't control the who comes and who doesn't, Mr. Roberts.
Okay, you do have a show, and you're let me see, you're every other week, I believe.
Yep, every other Tuesday.
Okay. But we do have you on this show to catch our listeners up on what's happening down in Muskegon County. And let's get to it. Let's get an update on the general thing. During the election, you heard nothing but crime, crime, crime. So is crime up? Are you doing a lot? Is there a lot of prosecution happening down there at the county building?
It's a great question because as I was watching election coverage and even leading up to that, a lot of political ads, especially on the west side of the state here, and for those upper offices, there was always some gearing towards defunding the police, and this person hates the police, this person supports the police, and then you'd have commercials with law enforcement telling them how great they were, and it. I guess that for whatever reason, somebody had done some research and decided that crime was one of the top three things to hit on. Obviously, abortion was a big one. That was probably number one. The
Mm-hmm.
economy or inflation was number two. And then what I was seeing was crime being number three. So interesting that became a political issue in the sense that I'd say the last 2 years, 2.5 years, maybe even 3 years, at least at the state level, there's been a lot of criminal justice reform.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about reform, not necessarily increasing the number of crime or penalties, but more so decreasing punishment and whatnot. And so um, I preface all that to say that, since I took off in 2013, uh, we have been keeping track of the number of criminal complaints in the county as a whole. And as we've seen over the last now almost 10 years, we've seen a readily steadily decline in the number of criminal complaints taken in Mesquite County as a whole. And then we drill it down even further. We look into our two I'll say urban core areas, Muskegon Heights and the city of Muskegon, and we're seeing a decrease in those areas as well. I mean, that doesn't mean that we have no crime.
Mm-hmm.
I can't say that for. I'd love to say that, but I can't say that. But I think directly answer your question. I think we're seeing a decrease in that, and and folks, Joe Citizen or Joe Public out there, or Jane Public, I should say, unfortunately, when the news comes on, that's not what you're hearing. You're just hearing about the shooting here, the whatever there, and so you get this perception that, oh man, we are just ransacked with crime, and that's not necessarily true.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, in fact, it's quite the opposite. That I think overall we've been seeing a steady decline over the last several years, and there's a lot of people to applaud for that, community included, that for those results.
Okay, so let's talk about that because there's maybe a difference, and I think that echo might be me. There is a case at a bar that a guy received a plea bargain. What are the rules of getting a plea bargain, and what was so special? Because this guy for murder received what, 15 years?
Well, he hasn't been sentenced yet, but it looks like he's looking at 17 years.
Oh yeah, the gun charge.
Yep, yep. So there aren't really any special rules, Greg. I mean, every case, regardless of whether the charge is the same, is different because the facts and circumstances, the people involved, what evidence you have and don't have is always different in every single case that we handle.
Mm-hmm.
And in this particular case, as is sometimes the case when we deal with uh, cases that have kind of a continuing investigative nature to it. And homicide cases are probably the best example of that. That obviously, when a crime like that occurs, our first priority is to make sure that those involved get held accountable almost immediately,
Mm-hmm.
and we issue charges. And my office issues open murder charges, that's typically what we do in a homicide case, because that leaves everything on the table: first, second degree, and manslaughter. Even
Right.
though the news report
Mhm.
didn't really accurately report that. When we go to trial on an open murder charge, all three of those possibilities are for the jury to consider, and the facts and circumstances determine, what theory we're going to argue in front of the jury.
Mm-hmm.
In this particular case, um, as horrific as it was, one of the biggest things that was discovered, and this was after we charged it, because again, we don't have the luxury of having everything in front of us, and our first priority is to make sure that we get at least the person suspected to be responsible off the street. One of the biggest things that was uncovered is that our forensic pathologist, so the doctor that does the autopsy, these witnesses, in particular in homicide cases, can be very critical, because they are opining on the cause and manner of death, which are two things that we are required to prove in any case, where homicide is involved. In this particular case, our forensic pathologist, in examining the victim's body, and in particular looking at the number of wounds, the locations of those wounds, and what we were interested in was, can you differentiate between shot number one to shot number, I think it was 4 or 5. I can't remember
Mhm.
off the top of my head. And what we were told by our expert was, I can't tell you that shot number one. I can't tell you that if what was the fatal blow. Could have been shot number one. Could have been shot number 5. And that was a big difference in this case, because um, what happened was is that the victim in this case came to the bar, uh, recognized this person, and I think there was a female involved. There's a love triangle, if I'm not mistaken, and
Mm-hmm.
immediately kind of came from behind, and sort of sucker punched and attacked him. And then obviously the fight's on, and the first few shots were what we would consider to be in a defensive posture. And then the
Mhm.
last shot was the one that I was most concerned about, because at that point in time the victim was already on the ground. And so
Mhm.
Ooh.
you can see why, that expert's opinion really mattered, right?
Right.
So if let's say shots 1 through 3 were non-fatal, but shot 4 was, that's big for us as far as,
Yes.
you know, being able to go beyond, you know, either an acquittal, a non-charge, or a murder charge. But because that expert said, look, first shot could have been fatal, second shot could have been fatal, all during that, what I'll call that self-defense time,
Mm-hmm.
that's where that issue becomes critical. And you know, part of my philosophy and really general practice is that when we're dealing with these cases, victim-related cases, whether it's the victims themselves or in homicide cases, the family, we have open and honest dialogue throughout the course of the case. And that's why it was critical in this case that the family was consulted at every step of the way, which they were. They
Mhm.
recognized and understood the issue and ultimately agreed with our assessment and allowed for us to make this offer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's again, I think, unique in this case is that the actual sentence for a manslaughter conviction, which is still a form of murder. Let's not sugarcoat that.
Mhm.
Is pretty high. I mean, it's unusual to get a 15-year sentence on a manslaughter conviction, and in fact, the court has committed to even exceed the guidelines to make that 15 years fit, if in fact the guidelines come back lower than that. So there's no question that this gentleman is going to do 17 years in prison as a result of his actions.
Pastor Burns.
You know, so tell me a little bit when you say that your family's involved. So every phase of the trial, you're updating them. You present your assessment of how likely is you'll get a conviction. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, I mean, what we always tell folks, and again, whether it's in a homicide case, it's the family, or
Hmm.
if it's a victim-related case, it's the victim themselves. Is we try to give our fair assessment. Now, we can never predict what a jury's going to do.
Oh,
I mean, that's you might as well try to win the lottery. You
yeah,
just don't know what a jury's going to do.
sure.
But we try, based on our experience, you know, based on my trial experience and my upper management's trial experience, try to give a fair assessment on how we think a jury is going to evaluate the facts and circumstances of the case, and we provide them the various options to consider. And certainly, we listen very carefully to what their questions and concerns are, and ultimately work towards trying to come to an agreement amongst the parties. And it's pretty rare that we go against the victim's wishes unless they're so far out of, you know, left field that
Hmm.
we understand that that's not in the best interest of the case. But for the most part, you know, we always are able to work through all the questions, concerns, and then come to a resolution that everybody is satisfied. And in this particular case, that was what happened.
Okay.
I want to take you nationally to a case. Elizabeth Holmes. She's the woman that bribed, that schemed out millions of dollars. She's being sentenced today. Um, the prosecutor's asking for 15-year sentence and 800 million restitution. Um, they're asking for time served. She received lots of letters, hundreds of letters, including a letter from Senator Cory Booker, which I was
Hmm.
surprised, in support of letting her stay home because she's pregnant. Um, I want to bring this up because they call this white collar crime. They were saying if she's found guilty, that more than likely she will just go home. She will have her baby at home because during the appeal serve time, she will be home. Um, and I'm thinking, in a lot of cases, people usually, if they found guilty, they usually go to jail. Can you explain the difference on this one? Because this is an interesting case.
Yeah, and I have no idea what the facts and circumstances are of that case. It sounds like, given the dollar amount, I bet it was in federal court.
Yeah,
Okay.
billions.
And I
Yeah.
think what people need to understand is that the sentencing practices and rules are different in federal court than they are in state court. And so there are and I'm not well versed in the federal system. Obviously, I'm a state prosecutor, so that's where my expertise lies. But I can tell you, based on our experience working with our federal partners on various cases, that the sentencing practices are vastly different in all phases of the process. But yeah, I mean, when we talk about time served, we're talking about any time, any detention time that she had served up to that point would be considered good enough for the incarceration part of her sentence. Now, I'm sure there's going to be supervision and other things attached to that, but that's what that time served language means. Uh, obviously, Greg, I wish I knew a little bit more about the case, but certainly when you're talking about embezzling millions and millions of dollars, um, I think that's kind of a big deal. I think that's kind of a big deal, regardless of who you know and who you are. Um, I kind of subscribe to the idea that, for example, when I chose public life and to become a public figure, if I were to go out and rob a bank, um, and I've never been, I have no criminal history whatsoever. I've never been charged or convicted of any crime in my life. And so, for all intents and purposes, that would be favorable to me. But because of who I am, uh, I think I should be treated a little bit differently. I mean, I just do. There are certain aspects, and by being treated differently, I mean I should be harshly treated.
I know you missed that, but I'm glad you cleared that up.
Let's get that clear. Harshly treated. So I mean, yeah, it always, and again, I try not to armchair quarterback this stuff too much, especially if I don't have everything in front of me. But I feel the same way about celebrities, athletes, professional athletes. Money should not really be able to buy you out of trouble. And in some cases, I think we've got a lot of examples where that has been the case. And that's sad because, I think of a lot of the folks that we deal with who don't have those means.
Right.
And, we work towards trying to make sure that we treat everybody as consistent and fair as possible. Because, whether, I've always said, even when I was an assistant prosecutor, whether you represented yourself, you had a public defender, or you retained your own lawyer, your offer is going to be the same. It doesn't matter whether you bring in the high price lawyer, you've got a public defender, or you choose to represent yourself. I'm not going to treat you any different, because again, the person and the facts and the circumstances don't change because of who you have sitting at the table with you, in my opinion.
Pastor Burns, before I
Yeah.
go.
Okay, DJ, we saw you briefly election night, and God, we didn't know how things were going to turn out. So now we have a Democratic governor and legislature. As a prosecutor or prosecutors association, or any, I know it's kind of early. Any particular legislation you're looking to push or see come in front of the legislature next term?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I think I can confidently say, because this has been an issue for us prosecutors across the state, both Democrat and Republican,
Hmm.
is that we're facing a very limited resource availability because county prosecutors are subject to obviously the county boards that are in their county and the budgets that are given to them.
Hmm.
And what we've seen over the last, I'd say, 4 years is the state has decided to spend a lot of money on the indigent defense system, which again is okay. I mean, there are areas, including our own, that needed an infusion, if you will, in order to make sure that
Hmm.
everybody gets equal and fair and good representation. I have zero problem with that. The difficulty is that what we're seeing both across the state and even here in Muskegon County is because of that, public defenders' offices are now larger than the county prosecutor's office, and that and a lot of times people talk about, well, they should be equal, a parity, they should have equal this and equal that. But I guess I want people to understand that everything that comes to the criminal justice system comes to the public defender's offices across the state starts in the process. It starts in the prosecutor's office.
Mm-hmm.
We see 100% of everything that comes into the criminal justice system because we're essentially the gatekeeper. We authorize charges and whatnot. If we don't authorize charges, that case isn't moving it forward. And so what people need to understand is that we are handling 100% of the work. Public defender's offices are handling about 75% of that. Okay, and that's just the nature of it, because you'll have your cases where lawyers aren't needed, or people have retained lawyers, or they decide to represent themselves. And so there isn't parity in that sense. That it shouldn't be that the public defender's office has more resources than the prosecutor's office. It just shouldn't be that. And so across the state, my colleagues and I have worked very hard to get the state to see that and recognize that. And that was one of the things that we talked to the governor specifically about in the months leading up to the general election. And so I suspect that one of the biggest priorities for my association and my colleagues is to have the governor really put some teeth to that. Provide us some state funding that'll help supplement our budget, so we can not only pay our people appropriately, but also make sure that we have enough resources to adequately handle the case volumes that each one of our offices has, so that we can make sure that when we're reviewing something to charge, we are doing that efficiently and fairly. When we're preparing for trial, we are doing that efficiently and can do that without having to triage 15 other cases.
Right.
And so that's, I would say, Greg, or excuse me, Pastor, that's probably the biggest priority for the association, is to see a little state funding to offset the deficit that we've felt for a long, long time.
DJ, how do we handle? What is your biggest recommendation? Somebody gets sentenced guilty,
Mhm.
um, and then it's appeal, and it just goes over and over. And how do we fix this where a person just starts serving their time immediately? Um, like we were talking earlier, sometimes money comes in this. Um, who attorneys, how much you can spend. How do we fix this system?
Well, I mean, I think we're doing the best we can right now. I mean, like I said, I have zero problem with the state stepping in and helping to adequately resource indigent defense. Even in Muskegon. So when I first started, way back when, um, the system was run by private attorneys, and they were good lawyers. But the problem is that they're balancing the public defense versus their own private defense,
Hmm.
and that conflict of time,
Sure.
just just being reasonable about that conflict of time, somebody's going to lose out somewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So making sure that we are able to have a system for public defenders, so people who can't afford lawyers get a lawyer that's dedicated to their case and they don't have anything other than other public defender cases to worry about, I think is a step in the right direction.
Hmm.
And obviously, I'm a big fan of a fair playing field and making sure that we're all on the same page in that playing field. So I think that goes a long way to helping right the system. But I hate to say that it comes down to financial resources, but in a sense it does. So, quite honestly, to handle the caseloads in my office and the caseloads running through the system, you would need to add a few more judges, a whole lot of prosecutors, a few more public defenders, and and we would be able to I think keep things moving relatively swiftly and efficiently. But that's just not reality, unfortunately. And so, I'd like to think that between Fred Johnson and myself, that we're hiring quality people that understand what their role and responsibility is in our trying to dispense justice in a fair and efficient way, so that our system doesn't get bogged down. And I'll brag about Muskegon County for a second. I think overall, we don't have the sort of well, I'll say case backlog that some of my other colleagues across the state have. We're not seeing, this huge backlog of cases that need to be done. We've done a really good job of trying to filter those out as quickly as possible so that we can get back to where we were pre-COVID. So yeah, I mean, I think there's probably still some statutory reforms that can be put in place that might help not only hold people accountable, but maybe reduce a little bit of our jail and prison population.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to take probably some patience and the right leadership, and whether or not our the makeup that's coming in January is the right leadership to get that accomplished. I guess we'll wait and see. Um, you know, Sometimes when you get what you ask for, in this sense, the governor has control of both chambers essentially. Um, the expectations are pretty high.
Yeah.
Right? Cannot just now point the finger and say, "Well, I tried, but the Republicans controlled this or the Republicans control that." Well, now you control everything.
Exactly.
So, we'll see. We'll see. We'll see what happens.
Pastor Burns.
DJ, you've probably done this at other times, but we talk about the prosecution of criminal cases. But man, for our listeners, why don't you tell them some of the other responsibilities that your office has?
Man, I tell you what, you got some great questions. I appreciate that. I owe you lunch or something for 15 minutes.
He's throwing those softball pitches at I'm throwing fastball.
No, I mean, yeah, I mean, a lot of times when people think about prosecutors, they think about what they see on TV, which is, obviously we're constitutionally mandated to review and charge cases. We're certainly constitutionally mandated to represent the people of the state of Michigan in the courts. And that's where you typically will see, when you think of prosecutors, that's what you think of. But there's so many other statutory duties. In fact, I believe in Michigan, prosecutors have about 300 statutory duties assigned to them. Don't ask me to list all 300 because I can't. But ultimately, not only are we doing our day-to-day court work, but obviously we have responsibility to prepare for things that are coming up, whether it be for pre-trial sentences or other trials, and that's an everyday thing. And on top of that, we have the public coming in sometimes with concerns and questions. We're always dealing with our various law enforcement agencies coming in during the day, whether it's for search warrants, trial prep, legal questions. I've assigned a couple of people to our specialty courts here, which is, again, outside of what our normal court responsibilities are. So I have somebody covering mental health court, I have somebody covering recovery court. I personally cover Veterans Treatment Court. And again, those are outside of what our normal responsibilities are. Then one of the things that I always at least strongly suggest to my assistants, because this is the walk that I walk, is getting involved in the community in some fashion. Whether it be, I've got a assistant prosecutor who is heavily involved in our local JC's chapter. In fact, has done so well to be recognized at the state and national level. There was a point in time I had some folks, Girls on the Run. They were part of that. Just getting involved in some aspect of the community so that people understand that we're just not the suits that walk in and out of the courtroom every day, that we actually care about the people that we're representing, and we're showing that through our community involvement. And quite frankly, I don't know why anybody wouldn't want to do that. It's one of my favorite things to do. I mean, I get to do things that I never thought I would do. I mean, sit in the dunk tank, model purses, dance, sing. I mean, who wouldn't want to do that outside of this job? I mean, that to me. So yeah, I mean, all those things are things that not everybody sees, and it's not for recognition. Certainly, that's not why I do it. I do it because there are a lot of aspects of this community that I care about, and I'm going to support. And if it means I gotta, put some dancing shoes on and dance on a stage for a couple of days, I will do it.
I just want to know when you're going to be in the dunk tank again. I will. I'll bring my credit card.
Yeah, you may have to stand in line. Yeah, it definitely won't be on a day like today. I can guarantee you that. It'll have to be like mid-July where it's like 90 plus.
Hey, DJ, you brought up something. Two things I want to talk to you about. Mental health, number one, but also you guys really do work on the other side of trying to keep people coming back and going back into jail. I mean, you guys really do work hard with those programs.
Yeah, I mean that's a big deal for me. Ever since I've been elected and I've got heavily involved in our statewide association, and that relationship led me to spending a lot of time in Lansing, dealing with legislation and other stakeholders, and really getting into the meat and potatoes of the things that were coming in and out of our legislature. A lot of this stuff becomes, sort of a passion, and mental health, substance use issues are two of the things that I think we're trying to make some headway into, and we're getting there slowly, but we still have some work to do. As an example, with health, through a partnership in partnership with Health West, we're working on a thing called critical incident training, so CIT. And what that is a 48-hour-ish training that most of our law enforcement officials have gone through, and to really help get their mind on the idea that that person that's acting erratic and irrational may have some other issues going on, and now I want to train my way of thinking, how I handle that situation, as opposed to what officers are normally trained to do, which is see problems, arrest problem, move on to the next problem. And that's where a lot of these incidents can get escalated to things that we don't want to see happen. So, Stephen County has spent many months making sure that all our officers are trained in this, so they know how to handle it. And the nice thing is that Health West offers a mobile crisis team that they can get on the phone with and say, "Hey, I need you down here to kind of help me de-escalate the situation." So that aspect of it is great. And we're still working towards trying to find a way to provide good diversion center for the mental health people that law enforcement comes in contact. We don't necessarily have that. The jail is not that, and so that's something that's been worked on and talked about for a few years. Those are just some of the things on top of the reentry stuff that I am personally involved in. Law enforcement is involved in with our exit program, which is exit from transition. That jail transition type program that's been in place for about 4 years. I'm heavily involved with Fresh Coast Alliance.
I was getting ready to say you're very involved in Fresh Coast.
Heavy in the reentry space, both from just peer kind of counseling, recovery coaches, clinical therapy. That is really, that's taken off leaps and bounds. And we're even using some of the guys and gals that have real lived experience and going into schools and talking to kids about making good choices, power of choice. Using some of the I tell you. Those some of the avenues, because if I'm going to care about public safety in the community, then I have to make sure that when somebody enters the criminal justice system, that it's first and what can I get involved in, my office can get involved in, that we can make sure that becomes a reality. Those are just some of the examples, I think, of how we can be preventative and still restorative at the same time.
Mr. Burns.
DJ, I wanted to ask you a question. I know there's a big effort now to do the expungements. How does your office view that? I think people getting records as far as getting questions removed from past criminal histories. There's a big effort now to do the expungements.
Guys, I apologize. I'm getting a lot of feedback or echo or something. But you're asking about expungements?
Yes.
Yes.
Let me turn. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the expungements, I have to applaud certainly the um, the efforts of the legislature over the last year and a half or so to really expand that law because the law we had in the beginning and even the brief time that it was reformed, calling that expungement was really just words on paper because it really didn't do and accomplish what true expungement should. And then it got expanded to where people can actually make a difference in their criminal records, which I certainly appreciate. And so there's still a process. Obviously, the statute still requires a process, but it does allow people to not only expunge felonies but multiple felonies, multiple misdemeanors, and eventually the goal of that legislation was to create a system where that would be automatic, that people wouldn't have to necessarily file paperwork with the court; that it would just automatically fall off. Now we're not quite there yet, because as you can imagine, that requires some significant computer technology. There's a lot of checks and balances that have to be in place, and so hopefully, sometime in the future, that becomes a reality. But I have to say, and certainly my hats off to the organizations, including our own public defender's office, that hold these expungement clinics. Fresh Coast just had one in September. Um, that gives people, a place to go to talk to the people that know what they're doing and find out, okay, here's what I have. What can I get rid of? Because again, a person's present that shouldn't necessarily be defined by their past, and that's true for a lot of people who have made mistakes along the way, but really now recognize that they're in a position where they want to better themselves, make a difference, and this stuff is holding them back, and I just don't think that's right in essence.
What did you say about when people say uh, you guys are being soft on crime?
Well, I mean, look, I tell you, if anybody wants to, I tell you what, the way that I handle that is that you can look at my record as it relates to violent crime. I don't know that we're soft on violent crime. In fact, I tend to be a little bit more aggressive when it comes to that. Crimes against kids too. I'm very, those things I'm very aggressive on. But to actually help somebody who's ready to make a change in their life and better their lives, to me, is not soft on crime. That's just common sense.
Mm-hmm.
And just because a person doesn't have a criminal history doesn't mean they don't have a skeleton or two in their past. And if they want to have if they want to drag those skeletons out and make that public so that they are on the same page and feel what it's like for these other folks, happy to accomplish that and let them really feel that. What does it feel like when all you want to do is get a job and to better your family, and they do a criminal background check and say, oh, you got this felony from 15 years ago, we can't hire you. That just isn't right.
I, man, that's deep. We're talking to county prosecutor DJ Hilson. Um, I want to go back to that because that is important because I see so many people do Fresh Coast and of course the church and rock. Um, those guys that just want a second chance, people that want a second chance and they don't get it because of something that they did. They served their time, but they're still punished because they got that scarlet letter on them.
Yeah, we talk a lot about that stigma, right? And I have to be honest and talk about my own my first few years as an assistant prosecutor, and how I viewed viewed that and viewed the world, and it can make you a very untrusting and cynical person. And that's not to say, obviously there's always going to be a bad apple. I mean, that's just the nature of it. I mean, that's how humans are, and that's how society is. But I tell you, through this latest career walk, if you will, for me, having met several people who have come out of the throes of incarceration or probation or what have you, and have these things in their background and work with them on other projects and programs. You begin to understand where you go back to this idea that, hey, listen, I'm going to treat you like a human being until you prove to me that I shouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to work pretty well, because I've met some really outstanding people. I mean, just outstanding individuals who, for whatever reason, made some bad choices and ended up in areas that they didn't want to be, but have recognized that and realized that they can make a difference and want to make a difference. And I'm going to support that 100%. And I've got a lot of people that I call friends that I probably wouldn't have called friends, 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But when you get to this idea of treat them like humans, we're all human beings, treat them with respect and dignity. And because they carry around this extra baggage doesn't change that. It shouldn't change my perception or how I feel about that person. And certainly it's worked for me thus far. And that's a philosophy I'm going to continue.
Okay, Pastor Burns.
DJ, going back to the mental health issue, are there enough people throughout the criminal justice system, legislature, to understand the issue? I'm speaking county. We know that with people committing crimes, and this comes down to just mental health issues. So even separate from drug abuse and mental health kind of go together. But not having a facility, we run a pantry, and not that I label people, but just listening to some people, you can kind of tell they're in need of some professional help. And I mean, we see them. We all know people in our community when they really need to be in a facility or getting better treatment. Is it enough people haven't raised the issue enough, or are people working on it? Is something going to happen?
That is such a great question, because I tell you what, in all the work that I've done at the state level, and been on statewide commissions, 2 of them, where that has been one of the topics, one of the priorities, one of the things that always made the agenda. And I've never quite understood. Everybody seems to recognize the issue and understand its impact on various things like the criminal justice system. Yet there never seems to be anything done about it. And for the life of me, I can't figure that out. I'm not sure if people are afraid of something. But I think, but there is. It isn't, to me. It's not one of those issues that is polarizing. I think on both sides of the aisle, everybody recognizes it, and why we can't get people to actually move on that, whether it be with financial resources or what have you. But nothing ever seems to get done, and that is, to me, I can't figure it out. I really can't, because it's not like people don't see it. It's not like people don't recognize it. It's not like they didn't bring in experts to talk about it, and yet there's no movement. So I don't know what the magic button or word is to get people to actually get something done. But they just seem to kind of walk right by it, in my opinion.
All right, prosecutor, walk me through. Okay, Black Friday's the next Friday. I go out and get slippery fingers and decide to steal some Christmas presents. And for the first time, I'm going through this whole prosecuting deal. What are some of the do's and some of the don'ts?
Well, let's see. Greg Roberts, boy, that warrant request comes across my desk. I have to take a minute. No, I'm kidding. Really, it all depends. So, for example, and we see this not all the time, but on a frequent basis, where people will commit the crime. We call that retail fraud, shoplifting, what you would typically call. And first-time offenders in a shoplifting case typically are not going to get charged at all. They're going to go through my diversion program. That's one of the reasons why we established it, is so that people who are making one-time mistakes don't necessarily have to enter the criminal justice system. So that's a program that would require about 40 hours community service, and pay some fines and costs, and it never sees the light of day in a courtroom. Now, if you happen to have made this a pattern over the last couple of years, let's say you have one or two of those prior convictions on your record that are too young to be expunged, then we're looking at something different, and ultimately, you'll end up being charged misdemeanor level stuff. You'll be in the district court visiting one of our 4 district court judges. Typically, I think judges back in the early days, stealing usually landed at like 3 to 5 days in jail. I don't know that many judges do that anymore, but certainly you'd be on probation, fines and costs, and you have a conviction, and have to pay restitution if, in fact, the property that you took was never recovered or was damaged beyond being resold. So you'd end up having to report to a probation officer on a regular basis, making sure that you don't commit any new crimes. There'd probably still be some community service involved. And so ultimately, the court would be like your parent for the next maybe 6 to 12 months. You have to mind your P's and Q's or something.
Okay, let's say I stole something a little bigger, like I wanted a car. I just went for the gusto,
Yeah. Hey, listen, go big or go home.
Go big or go home.
Yeah, I mean, so when you get to that upper level, then now we're talking about felony level material. So anything above $1,000 is going to be a felony level crime, and ultimately that's going to everybody for felony starts in the district court with what we call there's a preliminary examination, and that's a check and balance in our system. And so a lot of times these are waived, but if defense counsel demands one, then we have to establish probable cause on the record through either testimony or exhibits, and the judge decides, okay, you got probable cause that a crime was committed and probable cause that this person committed it, and it moves from the jurisdiction of the district court now to where it's going to end up in the jurisdiction of the circuit court, and then the new circuit judge takes over that case, and it becomes part of that judge's docket. And the first proceeding in the circuit court is going to be what we call our pretrial stage, and that's just a meeting between the prosecution and defense, where information is exchanged, whether it be documents, photos, police reports, any other exhibits that we might have in our hands at that time. And ultimately, a decision is made whether or not this is going to be a trial, a plea, are there any other hearings that we need, evidentiary issues that we need to have the court flesh out. And then a decision is made, does it go on the trial docket, does it go on the plea track? If it's a trial, it goes on the regular court's trial docket and wraps up. We have to be ready to go and bring jurors in. Essentially call witnesses, provide exhibits, and the jury decides, whether you're guilty or not guilty. If it's a plea, then ultimately the judge just needs to hear enough facts to make the determination that, yep, the crime was committed at the time and place alleged in the complaint. You committed it. Now move on to sentencing. So if you're convicted at trial or you plea, the next step is sentence. And that usually happens about 4 to 5 weeks after that. And ultimately, the court makes the decision as to what your ultimate sentence is. Is it incarceration? Is it incarceration probation? Is there no incarceration? Community service, fines and costs? Are you going to be required to go to a particular program? And whatnot. So, ultimately, depending on the severity of the case, that process can take as quick as 90 days from the time of the incident. Or more complicated cases, it can take anywhere from 1 to almost sometimes 2 years, just depending on how things are put together.
Okay, We're at 2:52. I want to get to Pastor Burns real quick.
All right.
I hate to bring this up because this is a very unpopular area, but it's you won't like this issue. But from time to time, I deal with people that have been convicted of criminal sexual conduct, and I know there's a high recidivism rate for people convicted of those. But part of my concern sometimes is sort of the feeling they have a lifetime sentence, and who knows for sure whether they'll ever do that same thing again. But I've worked with people who've had a hard time getting jobs, certain places, just because that's on their record. And I know that's a tough area for everybody in law enforcement. But any thoughts about that? I've worked with people who've had a hard time getting jobs.
Yeah, Pastor. Way to finish this segment with a tough question. I appreciate that very much.
I gave you the softball.
You've been throwing a softball, and then he threw you a knuckleball on the last question.
We call that setup, but okay, no.
And again, I know this is a tough area, but
Yeah, no. Look, that's a tough issue, and understand. My philosophy about second chances and giving people an opportunity, still remains the same. But there are certain areas where I think naturally we have to be cautious. For example, somebody that has been alleged committing a sexual assault against a child, I'm going to be pretty sensitive to that, and there's going to be probably a little bit more scrutiny as it relates to what happens next. And so I can appreciate that because, again, we're talking about, a victim who isn't strong enough to protect themselves and is in that innocent stage of life. So, yeah, I mean, those areas, assaultive crimes, violent crimes, I think fit in that same category. So, yeah, I mean, I think we all try to recognize that life does go on, but I think in the back of our minds too. So yeah, I mean, in particular, I'll speak for myself. I think of the trauma that particular victim had to go through, and the trauma that continues to exist. I'm sure, Pastor, you have talked to those people who have been through that experience, and that's not something that you wake up the next day and everything's okay.
Right.
It takes a long time, and so I try to be sensitive to that as well and appreciate that those folks, whether they're young or old, are still working through what happened to them. And that has to be part of the conversation as well. So yeah, I mean, and again, I go back to that idea of stigma and whether or not those particular crimes carry a little extra. They probably do, and maybe there's some, I won't say reason or right to it, but I can understand and appreciate it.
That's very interesting that you brought that up, Pastor Burns, because I just joined this new credit thing where it checks your credit, checks your internet, the name on your internet background. But one of the things came up was, do you have any people with criminal, sexual, anything in your neighborhood? And that's almost like you said, a lifetime offense. And being a person that's been a mentor to somebody that had a case like that, all that, walking hand in hand with that person. Now that person, he's never returned back to prison, has a family, has the car, has the American dream, but he still has that letter on his chest, and will always.
yeah. But just a tough area, Greg. I guess you and I both work with people like that, and being fathers of daughters, we're not, we're not even if I was a father of a son, but somewhere is that balance sometime, and you feel for them. But DJ, you made a really good point, which is you balance out people who, on the other side, the victims who deal with those issues, after 5 years of that person serving or 10 years, they're dealing with issues for a lot of times a lifetime. And I think that's a reasonable way to kind of look at how to balance that out.
DJ, we have 4 minutes. I'm gonna leave it up to you. How, as a radio station, we know that you have a show, but how can we and what can we do to help Muskegon County when it comes to crime, prosecution, whatever?
Well, look, I think you guys do a really good job, just like Big Rob and PA do. I think really making sure the community understands that they play a vital role in keeping our community safe. Law enforcement does have eyes and ears out there, but they can't be in every place at every single moment in time. And really, we rely on the community to provide us that critical information. And there are a lot of ways to do that, even ways to do it anonymously, so that the information gets to where it has to be, but you're not necessarily labeled as a person provider.
Mhm.
And there's a difference, in investigation versus prosecution, because in prosecution, I need live bodies that are going to come to the witness stand and talk about what they saw, what they heard, or what they did. And so that's where that live body testimony is so critically important. But I've said this since day one of becoming prosecutors, that I think our community, I think to some extent they do recognize, but our community needs to recognize that we are stronger together than the small minority of people who are committing those crimes.
Mhm.
And so if we all stand strong together, we will defeat that which is making our community unsafe. And so I think what you guys do and what the beat does is continue to spread that message, because obviously you guys carry a lot of credibility in the community, and probably reach a lot more ears than I can reach. But I think if we all stand together with that message, I think that goes an awful long way to making sure that our community understands that, for me personally, I'm going to stand right next with him. I'm going to be standing right next to him, right there with him, and fighting this fight, because I care that our community is strong and safe, just as much as everybody else does.
Okay, 1 minute. Okay, it's Thanksgiving. What is the prosecutor's dream Thanksgiving meal?
Oh, listen, really juicy turkey with a big plate of stuffing and gravy all over it, all over it.
Well, that lets me off the hook of cooking your brisket.
Wait now, wait now. I didn't realize that brisket was on the table, because
DJ, if somebody wants to get a hold of you, how can they get a hold of you?
a couple of ways. One, our direct line here at the prosecutor's office is 231-724-6435. Or my email is Hilson, Hilson, D as in dog, A as in apple, at MuskegonCounty.net.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for Thanksgiving. We want to thank our guest, Prosecutor DJ Hilson. I would really want to thank you, Pastor Melvin Burns, for being my sidekick. And listen, we're going into Thanksgiving weekend, Thanksgiving week. Have a little passion for your family members. Go out there and sow a seed. Remember, next Tuesday here at 1 o'clock, we're giving turkeys away. Listen, you've been watching Torrent 2 for this day. Take care and God bless.
All right. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Happy
Happy
Thanksgiving, you
Thanksgiving.
guys.
All
Thanks
right.
for having me on.
Hey, don't eat too much, bro. We'll see you